So in last week's video, I took an i9 and a 1080 Ti and stuffed them into the new Mini. After some tuning, I was able to get it running pretty well, but then I wanted to try something even crazier. First though, I had to work on our various vehicles, including my Jeep, which gave me some time to think.
This is Old Leaky, my 77 CJ7. It's a lot of sevens. With the help of some friends, I built her from scratch with no 2 bolts touching. She's powered by a Chevy 5.7 liter V8 and made with a 350 turbo transmission. Her purpose is serious off-roading. A lot of people down here like mud, but I prefer the rocks. And there's nothing I enjoy more than taking her to the Texas Hill Country to do some climbing. Now you can imagine at low speeds with this much power, she gets pretty hot. And while this engine is a lot for this little Jeep, the copper radiator does a pretty good job keeping temperatures tolerable. Now, as I was working on this the other day, I had a question pop into my mind. What if we use a system like this to power a computer? I thought about it, but it'd be kind of hard to adapt a car radiator to work with a computer system. Doable, but it would take a lot of time. But what if somebody already made a car-sized radiator for liquid cooling computers?
A while back, my mod father, Bill Owen, introduced me to Jakob from Watercool. Bill has always had high praise for Watercool and has called him the Rolls-Royce of water blocks. I would say I was skeptical, but there are a lot of great products out there, and I have a high reverence for the double R. But I sent an email to Jakob outlining my crazy plan. A couple weeks later, I was opening a 30-pound box of early Christmas present awesomeness. I still had to purchase over $400 of fittings, tubings, fans, pumps, and coolant, so I was still very much invested in this project. But the stars of the show were the products sent to me by Watercool. The roth 360 is impeccably built and the heart of this project. It dwarfs the already massive Airplex modularity unit I was planning on using, and the finish is just as good as that legend. Watercool also included a beautiful powder-coated grille for the unit and a full set of chrome-plated mounting brackets. The water block impressions were also good. I'll save the reasoning behind my choices for later, but the fit and finish were up there with the competition, particularly with the Heatkiller 4 CPU block. It feels like there's more copper in that block than an entire budget all-in-one unit. The prince among these parts is the fabulous Heatkiller tube. Even without installing it and testing it for performance, this Reservoir D5 pump top combo unit is so impeccably built that I was enamored. In all honesty, this was the finest Reservoir I have ever seen in person, and it's not like I'm new to this game. I had many more parts and pieces to unbox, but I was itching to play with my new toys, so I started setting up the radiator with the beautiful chrome-plated wall mount brackets. Coolants makes my fittings of choice, so I used their 90-degree swivel fittings in 2 of the several radiator fill ports. The roth, for modular radiator, I'm guessing, supports many different fan configurations thanks to its modular mounting system. I found a pretty good deal on a case of 180mm fans, and decided to use 4 of them to cut back on noise and the complexity of wiring 9 120mm fans. To try and live up to the professionalism of this unit, I wanted to custom wire everything. So after a quick test, it was off to my soldering station so I could integrate some LEDs into the roth fan grill. I purposely ordered the high version of this grill, which gave me 5 more millimeters of clearance in which to carefully lay down my LEDs. Many 180mm fans are 30mm thick, but I found some 25mm ones so I could implement this idea. I believe the result to be stunning, and personally, I think it looks way better this way than if I had just bought LED fans. A little bit more subtle, but also in your face, for when you want to be flashy, but not be ostentatious about it. I knew I wanted the pump reservoir to be next to the fans, so it was time to install the gorgeous Heatkiller tube to the radiator. Watercool's basic mounting kit is much more chic than the name suggests. After removing the reservoir's top, the acetal mounting brackets slide over the brushed aluminum reservoir struts. They even have rubber isolated bolts for mounting. Watercool was kind enough to supply a powder-coated adapter specifically designed to mate the reservoir to the roth 3, but it seemed like it was incompatible with the optional radiator shroud, and there was no way I was giving that up. I dug through my big box of screws to find 4 stainless washers, which I used to directly mount the Heatkiller tube to the radiator guard. After tidying up my wiring with some sleeving and tightening a few more hex bolts, I was ready to give it one more test so I could admire my work. It's one thing to improve the temperatures of my i9 Mini, but I wanted complete silence, And for that, I needed to mount my radiator, pump, and fans in a room that wasn't where I was going to be. My workbench where I test PCs is against a wall shared with my garage. My plan was to feed tubing through the wall and have it exit a panel where I could plug in tubing for multiple PC loops. Hey, this radiator is big enough to handle that. The magic behind this plan is Coolant's patented quick disconnect fittings, so when I finished modeling the panel in CAD, I was finally ready for some dirty work. I would say that I made my CNC do my dirty work for me, but anyone who has one knows there are more work than just doing the darn part by hand. But it does have a steadier hand than me, and I wanted visitors to be able to read my name for this project that I had etched in the disconnect plate. Super May. Get it? It's gonna be really cold. After the quick disco panel was done, I decided to be extra fancy and make a wall mounting board. I made it this far, why not go all out? The mounting board would be attached to my garage wall, and then the radiator, power supply, and tubing would all be attached to it. I engraved my logo on it even though no one is ever going to see it because, well, I could. I was starting to feel like that was the motto for this project so far. Now for the scary part, cutting into my wall. My dad drove over to help me for this next part. We spent a good hour, 2 hours, determining the exit point for hoses, locating the studs, and feeding the tubing through the wall. The feeding was the trickiest part as there was a bunch of insulation in there, and the PrimaFlex LRT tubing is extremely flexible and would not push it down. If I could do this again, I would have used normal PCV tubing as it's super stiff. I chose PrimaFlex because it's flexible, but doesn't kink, so you can get to make tight bends. It also has a premium finish, and it looks fantastic. I'm spoiled by it, and next to Tygon, it's my favorite tubing. Anyway, eventually we got it fed through the wall and hooked up to my multi-disco plate. Back to the opposite side of my world, I went in to install the wall mount. It was covered in drywall dust, but it still looked pretty decent for a non-visible utilitarian panel. 3 deck screws into a stud was more than enough to rigidly secure it, and using the CNC to mark the screw holes for the Moraw wall brackets, well, that was cheating. The only tricky part was calculating how short my tubes need to be while still having it close enough to the mount. Plumbing finished, it was time to add power. I have a crate, literally, of old power supplies I've tested over the years, and I've been slowly trying to employ units like this 350 watt Meanwell. Overkill for a D5, 4 180s and some LEDs, sure, but it would be just collecting dust otherwise. I found some 90-degree shelving brackets which made an excellent mount for the power supply. When it was all wired, I checked my work with the multimeter. Now these type of power supplies require that you manually adjust for voltage drop, so I tuned it with my load until it was reading exactly 12 volts. Finally, the heat exchange system was hooked up and ready to run. But I always treat and flush my systems before hooking up to my water blocks. For lesser quality radiators, this usually means running a hose for a good long while to clean out debris and chemicals from manufacturing, but the quality of the Moraw system indicated that I was not going to need to do that. Using PrimaChill SysPrep, which is included in the tubing packaging, along with distilled water was going to be enough. And if you're like me, then you really enjoy that first fill up. Satisfying. It appeared the system was working, and I was really impressed with how quickly the air bubbles disappeared from the reservoir, which was a sign of good performance from the heat killer tube and the low restriction of the Moraw 360. Everything appeared to be working, and it was pretty fun to read the thermals on the fittings on the office side and see them to be the same as in my garage. For fun, I got out my thermal camera, and I'm super glad that I did, because it showed coolant leaking inside my wall. It turns out that one of the fittings inside did not have an O-ring. Luckily, I have a tool chest full of water cooling fittings and doodads, so I had that leak patched lickety-split. There are 2 ways to drain this system. You can either remove one of the 2 drain plug sets on the radiator, or you can simply drain from the wall with a quick disconnect hose. After a few hours of SysPrep cleaning, it was time to drain my loop so it could be filled with my coolant of choice, Coolant 702. If you're new to liquid cooling, I highly recommend you use Coolant 702 Clear. There are many dyed fluids, pastels, and pearls to choose from, and they all look fantastic, but many of these don't last long, and you do need to exchange and clean your blocks. If you don't, they can start to evaporate and leave dye behind. Coolant 702 is an industrial grade coolant and it lasts years. I use this in all of my professional installs. In my personal rigs, I use distilled water with a biocide like PT Nuke because water bleeds much faster than any coolant and, well, it performs the best. But it is susceptible to developing infection and, of course, causing corrosion, so it needs to be exchanged and your system needs to be cleaned a lot more often. For this particular install, I'm using 702 because in the unlikely event Biloxi, Mississippi experiences cold weather, I need something that's not gonna freeze. Now for the easy part, right? Not quite. I'm using the 1080 Ti Mini from Zotac for this rig, and there isn't an aftermarket full coverage block available for it. I do have several universal blocks I could use, and I was going to so I could save some of Watercool's money, but then I saw their GPU X core system, and my eyebrows were raised. This semi-universal block is unique because it has a satellite block for VRMs, which in a card like this absolutely need cooling. The idea behind the satellite block is you can cut it down and make it fit your particular GPU, and given the chance to make something not from concentrate, well, I'm always going to take it. Here's where I ran into my first problem. This GPU block shares the same style as many other manufacturers' universal GPU blocks, in that the in-out ports reach over the edge of the card so you can more easily plumb for multiple cards. Personally, I am not a fan of this design for universal blocks because it means your GDDR modules are going to be covered, and Murphy's Law means the modules that they cover are going to be the primary modules and thus run the hottest. Since it always works out that way. The second problem is that even if I wanted to mount the block over the GDDR modules, I couldn't. I could flip it the other way since I'm using a riser ribbon, but still there wouldn't be enough clearance. At this point I was thinking about giving up and using a truly universal block, but I knew the Core 60 was going to perform better, and I also need the amazing satellite block system. Modding time again.
Aside from my soul, now there goes a sight from my soul, there goes a sight from my soul, there goes a sight, there goes a sight. Aside from my soul, now there goes a sight from my soul.
Okay, the block was the right size, and that was the easy part. Now I need to add 2 BSP thread holes and cover up the ones I just made. Lucky for me, I had the tools to do this from my first water-cooled mini ancestor, Veritas. Veritas was my most complex and innovative mod ever, and also my biggest flop at modding shows, ever. She featured fully integrated custom liquid cooling and a totally custom power supply in the world's most unique form factor with the craziest layout. 300 hours of labor, and all that's left of her is the handcrafted and polished side panel. She was ahead of her time in 2009, but I digress. With a successful tap and a thorough deburring, I stood back to admire my work, and I was reminded I needed to fix the holes that I made. I hopped back into CAD and whipped up a cover plate for them. Now I really should have made this part by hand, as it would have been so much faster than the CNC, but I have a CNC, so I use that. I took a break and researched for about an hour if super glue was waterproof, but couldn't find an answer I trusted. Apparently this is hotly debated. So I mixed up some epoxy and used that. I was feeling pretty confident in my problem solving abilities so far, gotta say, but then I had to sit down and take a break when the next major one reared its ugly head. The width of the water chamber on the satellite block was way too wide to fit in between the chokes and capacitors on the other side of the VRM valley. It was basically like a ship that was too big to fit in the Panama Canal. Rather than giving up, I decided to throw more money at eBay, where I found a bar of solid copper. Now my plan, which is simple, was to cut a chunk out of it and solder it to my satellite block. Easy, right? Now, I own a lot of tools, but the one tool I don't own is a scroll saw. Or a bandsaw. Okay, well, I don't own everything, but one of those would at least been the proper tool for cutting a block out of my copper stock. Routing copper was a bad idea. I let the bar sit in my freezer till it was ice cold, but even still, I broke my nice white side end mill. A couple more painful attempts, and I had a big mess and a block that needed heavy cleanup with some files, my belt sander, and a good polish. I was also out of 50 bucks of end mills. A lot of work for such a simple rectangle, but at least the hard part was done. Sorta. It was hard trying to find out exactly how to precisely align the blocks so they could be mounted on the GPU. I don't have any footage of that, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. It was hard. I have a precision vise made out of solid steel, and I use it to clamp my blocks together because I figured it was flame-proof. I applied some flux to both copper mating surfaces, clamped the blocks together, and was ready to set off my smoke detectors. I've never done this before, but I was surprised how easy it was to solder these parts together using MAP gas. The flux helped the solder flow very nicely, and it created an incredibly strong joint. I had to use a chisel just to remove the splatter. This is a permanent bond for sure. The last step, as always, was to clean and polish my newly modified block, which was not only going to cool my VRMs, but the surrounding capacitors and chokes. Nice. Getting the blocks reassembled required a bit of dexterity due to stubborn O-rings, but I eventually was victorious. Lots of beautiful nickel-plated parts and pieces are required to plumb this card. Really an impressive amount, but that's part of the fun. I decided to be smart for once and hook everything up for a leak test before installing it on an $800 GPU. This is a good time to talk about the coolant lines. I mentioned before that I'm using PrimaFlex, which is LRT. Well, I ran out, so I had to wait for more to come in. So in the meantime, I had to use PVC. PVC is hard and it kinks. I almost have 20 feet of it here and it cost me $4 at Home Depot. 20 bucks of PrimaFlex is almost $60. But water cooling is expensive. The quick disconnect fittings here are made out of pure money. They are way cool though. You can pop them on and off even when the system's running and have no fluid loss. They truly are incredible. These will allow me to move my system around very easily and even hook up to different blocks in my office with ease. But we are concerned with the current block in question, the one I spent the last day mangling. Incredibly, it works. It was totally fun to see the block was a bit below ambient due to it being colder in my garage than my warm office. Now, this was a minor concern to me because I didn't want condensation on my hardware, but I was crossing my fingers that a running system would at least match ambient temps. Now for the fun part, assembling the GPU block. Well, I thought it would be fun, but I hate these RAM heatsinks. Individually wrapped thermal tape with low adhesion made these a pain. Ugh. The microfittings, though, are pure genius. They capture the tubing when you insert it, and the only way to release it is by pressing in the outer flange, which ejects it. Brilliant. I would use these in my entire system if I could. I think the finished product is beautiful in its own unique Frankenstein way. I have to say, I was pretty proud to have it functional and look somewhat like it was designed to mount this way. Now, my original plan was to use this awesome in-out PCIe key panel from Coolants and install it in one of the Mini's PCIe slots. I must have been totally distracted by Shiny when I ordered it because I forgot that the Zotac 1080 Ti Mini has a DVI port that occupies the top slot. And with this card being something I need to eventually restore to stock shape, I couldn't put 2 holes in it and fasten the pass-through ports to it. This is totally what I would recommend that you do though, if you're planning on keeping your card. My next option was to mount these to the Mini, which actually would have worked out pretty good, but this is a $700 prototype and I kinda wanted to keep it stock for history's sake. But I did make sure to take some measurements and prove that the idea would work, and it totally would. Just make sure to account for the total diameter of the quick disconnects when positioning your pass-through holes. But not that any of you guys are gonna try anything this crazy. Right? The rest of the assembly is fun to watch and totally self-explanatory. Note here that I'm using G-Unique's 450 watt DC unit and the matching custom modded power brick. This mod product he sells is incredible, and I think that with some minor updates, it will be my favorite solution for the Mini, but it does need some improvements. As you can see, I wimped out here and put the tubes to the GPU mounting tab aperture because I didn't want to modify this particular Mini. She has ice water running through her veins. Well, nowhere near that cold, as it was a pretty warm day. But incredibly, the system was not able to warm up past ambient, which absolutely blew my mind. There was no stress test I could throw at it which would put out more than 2 degrees above ambient, and I ran them for hours. Now, a common mistake I see on the internet is some people will get an all-in-one unit installed and take temperature readings before part temp is reached or the exchange unit saturation is completed. So I made sure to run these tests for a long time. The performance of Watercool's Roth 360 combined with their blocks and pump top is fantastic. And the best part is there is no noise, zero noise or heat being dumped into my office. The 1080 Ti was able to keep a boost clock of 1936, which I think is the highest for this particular Zotac card, as it did not budge 1 ounce. Didn't flicker or anything, just solid 1936. Now, the only card I've seen that actually clocks higher is my friend's EVGA Superclock 1080 Ti, which has massive fans and you have to run them on turbo mode to hit this, but that caps out at like 1987. Imagine what that card would do with this cooling setup. Well, it probably wouldn't do that much more because NVIDIA probably has a hard cap, but the potential's there. G-Unique's AC/DC power supply unit was able to survive a day of torture tests, but it did get extremely hot during gaming with this system. The highest recorded temp in PUBG after 2 hours was 72 degrees Celsius on the surface, which, it's just hot. Request a fan mod and keep the brick on a surface that's not going to be damaged by heat if you do order one. But I don't really want to sound like I'm knocking it because this is a ridiculously overspec system and this is a passive brick that's fairly compact. So it's not like it's a bad performer or anything. It's actually pretty outstanding. Well, I know what you guys are thinking. That was ridiculous. But here's the thing. It might not be as ridiculous as you guys think. A small handful of my customers purchase multiple minis and use them to rack mount for their media centers. Now, whenever you have a lot of computers close by together in a rack situation, it makes them really easy to liquid cool. So this could be a solution that makes sense for a lot of them. So I want you guys to try to put yourself in my shoes for a minute. I had to test out a lot of computer parts in my job to determine performance per watt. So they have to be running on my test bench for long periods of time, weeks at a time in fact. Now I also shoot a lot of videos and I live in Mississippi, so noise in my office is a concern, and also the heat. It's really hot here, and running the air conditioning right next to my face, well, that's more noise. Removing the heat and noise from my office where I am is a wonderful thing, which is why I invested all this time and money into making this setup. Also, yes, it makes for interesting videos. Additionally, I want you guys to know that my reputation is extremely important and I have to be able to recommend you things that are good and not play up things that I did not find to be that great. Luckily, I can say that Watercool's heat killer products are fantastic, and some of their products, like the reservoir and the radiator, are the best I have ever used, period. Now, I also want to point out that there are better ways of doing what I have done. Full coverage is the way to go for mini ITX, and there is a full coverage water block available for X299 and possibly for the Zotac 1080 Ti, though that's debatable. Linus gets one, of course, but I couldn't even find one to buy. I also really appreciate that Watercool is a really tiny company, and they design and make everything themselves in-house, and that's something I really respect. I also really respect that they're willing to reach out to the community and support enthusiasts like myself. That's fantastic, and that's a goal that I have for NFC systems. I'm really proud of Watercool for being able to do this. So yes, they make fantastic products, they're a good company, and I highly recommend that you check them out next for your water cooling build. Now, the point of this video was not to sell you stuff, but if you did want to buy stuff, you could look in the links in the description below, not only for Watercool's parts, but also for my Mini. But seriously, the point of this video was to have fun and to make something that I think is useful and to get people's creative juices flowing for coming up with alternate cooling solutions when they have a lot of heat they need to get outside of their workspace. At the very least, I hope that you found this video interesting. Special thanks to Bill Owen for introducing me to Jakob of Watercool, who was totally awesome, and I really appreciate you, man, for hooking me up and making this video possible. I once again want to thank Muhammad for commissioning this crazy build. Thank you to Defy Life for letting me borrow your G-Unique power supply for a really long time. I also want to give you a big hug to my Patreon subscribers. You guys have allowed me to take off the silly YouTube video advertisements at the beginning that nobody likes. And of course, thank you guys for watching this video, for liking it, for subscribing, for participating in the comments below. It's great fun. I really enjoy making these, and I look forward to our next crazy adventure together. So all that being said, have a happy new year, guys, and peace. Oh, now I gotta move this over and get my Jeep in the garage.